So, I finally started watching Lord of Mysteries. And let me just say, this show is surprisingly intriguing. Like, I am already hooked, maybe even dangerously so, because I've already been rapidly speculating and theorizing about it, which, again, it's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. Like, I found an interesting series, but at the same time, it might be a little too interesting. The reason I wanted to make this video is because I wanted to talk about this series and share my perspective, my thoughts, especially on the first 2 episodes, because I've only seen the first 2 episodes, because again, there is a lot in this. Like, even before going into the series, I heard a lot of people being like, they definitely throw a lot at you in those first couple of episodes, which they were not lying. And even for context, going into the series, I hadn't read any of the source material. I knew very little, like basically as little as you can know. Okay, well, maybe that's not entirely true. I knew it was a Chinese series. I knew it had crazy good animation because a lot of people have been raving about the animation, which having seen it, I'm like, I understand. And even seeing some pictures or some clips of it before I started watching it, I was like, I think I'm already sold. Not simply because of how beautiful the animation is, although don't get me wrong, it is beautiful, and I am not sure if I can compliment it enough. Legitimately, it feels like almost every frame could be a screensaver. Like, as I was watching through it, the amount of times I said, man, the animation is spectacular, might have been a little too much, but it was true. However, it wasn't simply the animation that truly intrigued me before even starting the series, it was the setting. Like, the moment I saw this other world had this Victorian-like setting, I was like, okay, that is phenomenal. And if that's not good enough, then it has all these steampunk elements and even these mysticism elements and just so much. Like, if you wanted to sell me on this series, just slide a random picture of the setting to me and I'm like, say no more, I am sold. But yes, I better dive into the actual episodes because I could talk about that setting all day. Do not underestimate how much I love the setting of this show and just like that vibe in general. And if the world itself wasn't already appealing enough to me, I also love mysteries. Like, I'll watch almost any Sherlock Holmes mystery or even some weird like crime thrillers and things like that. So even before beginning the show, there were so many elements to it that immediately appealed to me. But yes, going into it, I knew like, okay, I needed to pay very close attention. That was something people warned me about. They also said, like, don't think you're gonna understand everything because you're not supposed to. It's supposed to be a mystery, especially early on, so if there's stuff you don't understand, that's fine. Now again, some of that might not be on the show, that might just be a me problem. And I must admit, at least for me, it might have been a little too fast-paced. Like, I did routinely have to pause it just to take things in and actually evaluate what was going on. And at times it felt like, especially when they put info on the screen, that the subtitles would go by too fast and I kept having to rewind. So before really diving into it, if there was one major criticism I had is that, yeah, it probably was a touch too fast-paced. I certainly thought the show could have profited from a few extra seconds to digest things here and there, because at points it felt like they were throwing way too much at you a little too fast. But regardless, I was excited, so I started up the show. And even diving into episode 1, I like how right from the start, they introduce you to this power system. Now, I know it's a very simplified introduction, but even like that first little segment I found very intriguing, where they talk about like, this is the world of the Beyonders. And especially me going in, I was like, oh, okay, Beyonders? Okay, say more. I was like, I don't know what that is, but I want to learn more. So they tell you that by drinking potions, you're able to attain various powers of the Beyonders and ascend to divinity. And they briefly introduce the power system, how there's the 22 pathways, and then you start at sequence 9. And essentially, the lower the number of the sequence, the closer you get to like the power of the gods and different things like that. So immediately I'm like, that sounds fascinating. I have to assume that the reason they're introducing that is because our main character is going to become a Beyonder and rise up the sequences until he attains whatever the highest level is. Which again, I was definitely speculating like, what is the highest level? At first I was like, okay, does it go up to, is it 1? Is it maybe 0? Could you potentially even like break the limits and get into negative numbers? Like, I don't know, I was just wondering about all this stuff. And even while watching the show, I was perpetually asking myself like, am I trying to read too much into stuff? Or not enough? Like, that was the question, because it does feel like a show where even these little details are incredibly important. So honestly, I like that first little introduction. Then we get transported to this moment where it looks like our main character is combating, I don't know, some sort of evil creature. It's called Doomsday, and they're saying a bunch of stuff while the fight is going on about reality and different things like that, which I will say, I like the fact that this show gets into some themes, like some philosophical themes about the nature of reality. I hope that they explore that further, but regardless, it seems like our main character loses this fight on this Doomsday because like this creature destroys, it looks like the entire city, so I'm like, is that just a potential reality? I don't even know. Could be a vision. I'm not entirely sure. But even though I was only like a couple of minutes into the show, I was like, man, that actually was like a fair amount of stuff that they threw at you very fast. Like, okay, what's going on? And then all of a sudden you see we're in our world because there's a plane and things like that. And it looks like our main character falling from the sky. And it's clear like, okay, he's being transported immediately into this new world, into the life of Klein Moretti. And I will say it's an interesting choice that the main character is being transported into this new world, into this new life, at the same time that the audience is, that we are, so it's like everything he will learn, we will be learning at the same time. And it feels like a unique example where not only do I know nothing about this new world, nothing about the old Klein Moretti, which I will have to learn about, I also don't know anything about the new Klein Moretti. Like, I don't know anything about Jo Mingrui, and also apologies in advance because I definitely mispronounced that. Like, it was one of those interesting series that had so much mystery, not just about this new life, but even about the previous life of our main character. For example, I wanted to know, like, okay, what is his personality like? Is he a nice person? What are his character flaws? Because for all I know, he was a psychopath in his previous life, and he will become a villain in this life. Again, I don't know. I don't think it's that from everything I've seen. All I'm saying is, at that very moment, I knew nothing about the new Klein Moretti and the old Klein Moretti, so I found it fascinating that I would be learning about two characters at the same time, the old and the new Klein Moretti. So anyway, there were so many questions and I was just fascinated to learn more. And I do find it interesting that the moment he arrives in this new world, we are given the date, and first they mentioned it was 2 months prior to Doomsday. Now that opened up so many questions in my mind, like, okay, does that mean he's going to lose in the future to that thing? Is that a potential future that he has to avoid? Like, again, I have so many questions about that. But arguably something that's even more interesting is the date that they give is they say he arrived June 28th. Now again, I don't know, this might just be a coincidence. This might be a time when I'm reading too much into nothing, but I do think that's fascinating that that's the particular date that they chose, especially because it's a pretty big date in history in our world, because that's the day Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, which was a big moment because it had massive ripple effects that led to World War I. Again, I'm not sure if choosing that date was just coincidence, but I am seeing some parallels like, oh, a massive death happens and it causes major ripple effects like him arriving in this world and then whatever is about to happen, potentially world-changing events. Anyway, I don't know if that's just a coincidence, but I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to bring it up. And even one of the things I wanted to highlight, because I don't know if it gets talked about enough, because it feels like everyone focuses in on the animation, which is phenomenal, but the sound design is also top tier. Like, especially a lot of these transition shots have phenomenal sound design. Like, even the moment where he becomes Klein Moretti, just the sound is phenomenal. I remember thinking, like, even when I heard that, I was like, ooh, this would have been even better with surround sound. And that's not even the best example of the sound design. There are so many better examples, which I feel really immerse you into the world. But yeah, if things weren't confusing enough with being transported to this new world, into the life of this person you don't really know, this guy Klein also happens to have a bullet hole through his head and blood everywhere. Like, not only were we transported into a new world, we were transported into a crime scene. So again, we already have that mystery, and then if that's not crazy enough, we see a lot of images flashing through our main character's head as he's seeing these other people that he knew also dying in kind of mysterious ways. And then we see like their bodies at this other house, and then the detectives show up. And speaking of the way the detectives show up, just that sound design again of that door opening. Magnificent. Again, I will try not to bring it up too much because, again, I know I will just get repetitive if I talk about how great the animation is and the sound design and things like that, but it really is phenomenal. But yes, immediately I was like, man, I just have so many questions, and I was just a few minutes into the show so far, and I'm like, how many questions am I going to have by the end of the first episode, the second episode, you know, the 10th episode or something like that? But regardless, our main character, he's trying to find out like what happened. I will say it is fortunate that the old Klein Moretti journaled a lot, otherwise yeah, this would have been a much harder transition because again, transmigrating into another world is difficult enough. Obviously, I'm not speaking from experience, but if I were to do it, I imagine it would be incredibly difficult. Like I could imagine just teleporting into another country on the other side of the world would be difficult enough, let alone an entirely new world. Something I must say that I really appreciate about Klein Moretti is you could tell he was clearly a bright guy. Again, I didn't know anything about his previous life, but seeing him operate, seeing him transported to this new world, and just how he operates is a lot of fun because he's very good at improvising under a lot of pressure. He's also quite a logical thinker and very good at picking up on tiny details, so again, I really appreciate how bright our main character is. Especially because this is a story filled with mysteries. But yes, even as he's reading through his journal, you're getting all sorts of interesting information about Klein, and especially some of the stuff he and his friends were looking into, which likely led to their deaths, such as this ancient notebook that belonged to this Antigonus family. And so immediately I'm like, okay, what was in the notebook? Like, what was revealed? And easily the most mysterious part about Klein Moretti's journal is the fact that he actually wrote, even before he and his friends' deaths, that everyone will die, which is like, why did he know he was gonna die? Like, what exactly is going on? And again, it's intriguing, but again, there were plenty of mysteries even a few minutes into the show. I almost felt like I needed to take a breather and just collect my thoughts, you know, write down, okay, what exactly is going on? What do I know? What don't I know? What do I want to find out? Because again, like, my thoughts were going rampant at this point. But quickly we're introduced to Klein's sister, and I will say that this new Klein Moretti is handling things a lot better than I would be. Like if you're transported to a new world, into a new person, and you're also going through like this active crime scene, and then you're introduced to your sister, it's like, you know, he's taking this a lot better than I am. But I will say, I like the dynamic between him and his sister. Something I was definitely wondering about as I was going throughout was how much of the old Klein's like memories and personality will he kind of get? But I assume that's something which will only continue to be answered as time goes on. But something that's also interesting is we get to learn what he was doing before his transmigration, which was he was doing this luck enhancement ritual. So I was like, okay, it wasn't just entirely random that he ended up here. Like if I just transmigrated to this world and became Klein Moretti, like no, he was actually doing something that had some influence on him getting transmigrated. And even this idea of destiny seems to be like a constant theme. Like he's probably thinking this is bad luck because he makes it clear like, I want to find a way to get back home, which makes sense why you would think that, especially because he's got a life back home. But it's also funny that this idea of luck and even the idea of destiny is something that's stressed throughout. Like, hey, you might think that this is unfortunate and you got bad luck being transmigrated here, but what if it's actually good luck and what if it's actually destiny? But anyway, his sister leaves. I do like this brief moment. It's very subtle, but where he feels kind of sorry because he's like, I probably won't be here when you get back, thinking like, okay, he's going to go back to his world. And presumably she's gonna lose her brother for good. Like it's a tiny thing, but it shows like, okay, he's not a bad person. Because even if he just met this person, he does seem to care a little bit about them. Now, I also wondered if maybe part of that was because he does have some of the old Klein Moretti's personality traits and memories of his sister and things like that. I don't know, but regardless, it was one of the first character moments I saw of the new Klein Moretti. But yeah, so many mysteries already, and he even inquires like, wait, why wouldn't my sister have heard the gunshot? Which is another interesting detail. Add that to the growing list of mysteries with this show. But anyway, Klein heads out to do some shopping, and immediately you see there's this one guy who, he looks a little surprised to see Klein, and I think he's surprised because he was expecting that Klein would be dead. I'm pretty sure that's it, but regardless, he definitely seems like a danger to Klein. It also opens up a lot of questions like, okay, how many enemies does, you know, the old Klein Moretti have? But anyway, we see Klein walking around the city and man, it is just beautiful. You know, it captures that sense of wonder of this new world. Even as Klein is kind of walking around, he starts to notice like, huh, they've got things from our world. And it's fascinating that a lot of this stuff from our world, like whether it be this card game or the Steam engine, were all invented by this Emperor Rosal Gustav, which seems a little coincidental, like, hey, you know, this mysterious guy who's very important to this world just so happened to invent all sorts of stuff from our world. Which of course Klein speculates like, oh, he probably transmigrated here like I did, and I wonder if he's from the same country of China like I am, which will become important very soon. But even upon hearing that, I'm like, okay, so there's even more destiny involved with you coming here. Because again, this previous emperor guy who probably transmigrated from the same country as you was very important. You probably are very important for some other reason. But regardless, Klein is a little on edge, you know, because he knows like, okay, I'm being followed. Now he briefly encounters this clown guy who invites him to this show, which Klein is like, oh, no thank you, but something tells me that guy's going to be more important. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm a little distrusting around clowns, but no, I'm pretty sure he's going to be important. But regardless, Klein is trying to get away from these people following him, and of course he just so happens to wander into a fortune teller's like tent. But yes, he meets this mysterious fortune teller who has these tarot cards, which again, I'll be honest, I didn't really know much about tarot cards before. I did look up a bunch of them, because they do seem to be a pretty big thing in this show, especially from a few scenes heavily involving them. But she asked him like, hey, do you want to see your past, your present, your future? And he's like, the present. And she reveals the Fool card, which I think is fascinating for a few reasons. The first reason is because it's known as the 0 card of the tarot, which I was wondering, could that be setting up like his future potential with like maybe sequence 0 or something like that? Because you start at sequence 9, and I don't know how high it goes, but I was wondering like, okay, could that have something to do with it? And then even like the Fool, I looked up like, okay, what does that card mean? Because I'm not really that familiar. And it said that the Fool depicts a youth walking joyfully into the world. He is taking his first steps and he is exuberant, joyful. And I was like, okay, hearing that description seems perfect because he is literally taking his first steps into this new world. But again, we quickly see like this fortune teller was impersonating the real deal, so Klein kind of writes it off like, oh, not a big deal. However, like clearly you know that there's more to it, especially because she says like, oh, my fortunes are always accurate. But yes, Klein was definitely being followed, but he goes back to his place and he's like, okay, I'm just going to try this luck enhancement ritual again, which he's thinking it's going to send him back home. I get kind of the reason he would think that. But, you know, like, he's not going to go back home. Otherwise, you know, the series would basically be over. So obviously, he's going to go somewhere else. I will say, if anything, you have to do the opposite of luck enhancement, which is like luck removal or something like that. Because he does the ritual and then he gets transported to like this gray fog, which I still don't fully understand, but I don't think I'm supposed to yet. It's definitely fascinating, especially because not only does he get transported, but immediately these other two people also get summoned there. One is a girl named Audrey, the other is a guy named Olger. And a lot of the stuff that happens here, I'm like, is there another force here at work or something like that? But regardless, the moment that they show up and you see their vantage point and they're looking up, and even the musical score that kicks in, it's like they're looking up at him and it's clear like they're gonna think he's some sort of divine being or something like that. Which, to be fair, makes perfect sense because, like, you're transported to this mysterious place and you're looking up at this mysterious person. And I like the fact that they're asking him questions and he's like, I know less than they probably do, but he's like, okay, how do I want to play this? Because he doesn't know what's going on. And then when he accidentally materializes something, he's like, okay, this is kind of interesting. Like, okay, I can materialize stuff here. I am still wondering about his connection with this fog, because again, he certainly has powers here that the others don't. But I do find this moment kind of funny because he's like, you know what? I'm just going to fake it till I make it. Like, I will just pretend like I'm supposed to be here, like I know what's going on. And he becomes ultra confident. He even like deepens his voice and stuff like that. And it's a little funny, especially because these two people are like, okay, this is clearly like some sort of divine guy or something like that. Meanwhile, he has no idea what's going on. But yes, he assumes this commanding presence, and confidence is key. Like, if you're confident enough in any situation, most people won't question if you're supposed to be there or not. But I like the way he introduced himself as the Fool. And honestly, the more and more I think about this and the implications of referring to himself as the Fool, the crazier it actually becomes. And again, I'm still trying to piece it together as much as possible. But even with the Fool tarot card, it's about new beginnings. It's about someone starting their journey, their inexperience. There's even an element of having beginner's luck, which is another thing that's stressed about Klein, is the fact that he gets lucky. But a big element from what I saw about the Fool tarot card, which perfectly applies to Klein Moretti here, is that the Fool is very good at improvising. And so even to get into his abilities in this gray fog to manifest things, the moment he refers to himself as the Fool, he kind of manifests himself as the Fool, and he becomes insanely good at improvising. He also has that beginner's luck. Anyway though, there's a lot to sort through. I'm simply saying it's fascinating that he kind of manifested himself into the Fool, and I'm still trying to learn the extent of what that means. What does it mean to be the Fool? But there does seem to be way more at play here. And this moment was pretty funny, especially when this girl Audrey is like, hey, how do I become a Beyonder? And he's like, Beyonder? Like, what the flip is that? Like, he knows less about Beyonders than either of them. And then he's like, he just looks over at the guy and he's like, he knows. Which again, it's fortunate that he happens to know how to become a Beyonder. Not only does he happen to know, he also has 2 Sequence 9 potions, and the girl and the guy, you know, they make this deal almost like they were destined to come here, and this isn't just blind chance. Now, I also wondered if it wasn't simply destiny that this guy Augur would know about how to become a Beyonder and also have the Beyonder potions. But could this even be Klein manifesting reality into existence? Like maybe this guy knew nothing about Beyonders and Klein manifested it. Although I'm gonna be honest, I'm not really sure about that, and I could just be reading too much into nothing. But it is funny how he's acting like somebody who's all-knowing. Meanwhile, he's just kind of like passing off the questions, and he's like, oh, okay, they're saying some interesting stuff. Like, okay, what was that about? Like sequences and pathways and stuff, like interesting. But anyway, it is a little bit of a funny moment because he's bluffing his way through this meeting, and they are now fully sold on like, okay, this guy is the real deal. But as I was saying, that does go into the Fool's ability to improvise things and also get lucky. And so the 3 of them agreed to meet regularly at this tarot club, they call it. Audrey gives herself the codename of Justice, and this guy Augur gives himself the codename of the Hangman, which again, like these tarot cards seem very important to the series. But anyway, Klein at this point is basically making the majority of his decisions based on, will it improve my odds of getting back home? So I fully understand that, but of course I have to imagine as the series goes on, he will only get more and more attached to this place. Anyway though, the meeting ends and he's back in his room and he gets a knock on his door by the detectives. One of them is Leonard Mitchell, who was following him earlier, although he doesn't seem like he has any sort of ill intentions or anything like that. He also seems like a pretty easygoing, lighthearted guy for the most part. Now, the other detective, Dunn Smith, is a little bit more reserved, but both of them didn't seem evil or like they had any sort of ill intentions towards Klein. Now, so far throughout the first 2 episodes, I love these 2 detectives, and I appreciate them for different reasons. I think both of them have some great moments, but I'll talk more about them when I get to them. And they start questioning Klein, and it's pretty clear that they know a lot, so it's kind of hard for him to withhold the truth. So he kind of shares like just enough of it. Obviously, he's not going to tell them that he transmigrated here, but they come across here as 2 people who are genuinely curious about Klein instead of 2 detectives trying to catch a murder suspect. But they seem to know a lot more about his current circumstances than even he does, because they've gone through so many similar cases as Klein and his friends, and they're like, you're pretty lucky. Which again is also a theme, but they're like, hey, we want to take you to a psychic to do like this psychic test on you to just, you know, check your memories and things like that. And so he's going with them, some chaos ensues, and then he starts making a run for it, which honestly at first I was like, where exactly are you going to run to though? That's my question. Like, you're in this foreign world, you don't really know this place, but regardless, he's kind of running about, and then all of a sudden, this is where things get incredibly trippy, because all of a sudden some weird stuff starts happening with his environment, like the bricks going crazy and things like that, and it's clear this is a Beyonder's power, but what's also clear is Klein is kind of being led almost like a sheep exactly where they need him to go. And then he gets to a point and he goes into an open carriage and it's just like, you went right into a trap exactly where they needed you to go. But as trippy as that part was, this part here kind of freaked me out. At least it would freak me out if I was going through what Klein was. Because now he's trapped in this carriage, the driver is Dunn Smith, and it's like, wait, what the flip? But then Klein wakes up from a dream and I'm like, okay, what? Like, I don't know about you, but thinking that you were actually experiencing something that's real, only to wake up from a dream, like that's the kind of thing that could drive you insane, especially if it were to happen like 2 or 3 straight times. Like if you think that you're awake and then realize like, oh, okay, that's a dream, and you wake up, and then at that point you think that you're awake, and then you realize like that was a dream. And then if it happened again, you would be like, is anything real? You would probably get a little schizophrenic, because again, that seems to be a big theme of this show, is like questioning reality itself. What's real? But anyway, he wakes up, his door opens, and sure enough, it's Dunn Smith, and he's like, allow me to reintroduce myself. And we learn he's part of this organization called Nighthawk, which is like, okay, that's kind of fascinating. And they're under the Evernight goddess, and I'm like, okay. And this guy, Dunn Smith, shows off his powers once again, and I'm like, wait, is this like actually happening? Is it not? That's always the line between like, yeah, what is real, especially with Beyonder's powers? And I'm like, okay, if this scene wasn't trippy enough, then all of a sudden Klein gets questioned by this mysterious lady who's looking into his memories just to see like, okay, does he know where this notebook is and things like that? But it's pretty clear he doesn't know, but he then wakes up after being questioned, and it's clear like they still don't really know what's going on with him. So this is where Dunn Smith is like, hey, your life is in danger. We're not babysitters, but you would probably be better off with us. How would you like to join us? How would you like to join Nighthawk and become a Beyonder? Which immediately I was like, yeah, no. I know he's going to do that because, again, that sounds fascinating. But honestly, that's the way the first episode ends. And I know I probably spent a while discussing this, maybe too long, but there's just so much fascinating stuff. I just kind of wanted to share my perspective. Fascinating episode. I love the way it ended because, again, I want to see him become a Beyonder. I want to see him go up the sequences. You know, he starts at sequence 9. I'm wondering how high can he get? Presumably as high as possible. But yes, so many mysteries, but fascinating first episode. Now, episode 2, while they still kept introducing you to a lot, I felt like it was a little less overwhelming than episode 1. Don't get me wrong, episode 1 was certainly enjoyable, but there were so many moments I was pausing and being like, okay, do I understand what was going on and things like that? But yeah, episode 2, it begins with Klein. He's on his way to go and join the Nighthawks. And so he ends up in a pub and he says a secret code to the bartender. And he's like, okay, he opens up a secret passage for him, which I love secret passages. I mean, I love this whole world. I've talked about how much I love the setting. But yeah, the secret passages. And anyway, he ends up in, I guess, the Nighthawks base. And even when he ends up there, he ends up having to go through yet another secret passage. So I'm like, okay, how many secret passages does this place have? Regardless, though, he quickly sees Leonard come out again. And Leonard just seems like a pretty chill guy for the most part. But we see he's a sequence 8 midnight poet, which I'm like, okay, fascinating. And even briefly getting introduced to a bunch of the other members of Nighthawk. All of them were sequence 9 except Leonard, who was sequence 8. And then eventually we arrive at Dunn Smith's office, who is the captain of the Nighthawks. And again, I know I keep bringing it up, but the sound design is a thing of beauty. Like, just the moment right outside of his office is incredible. And something else is, I love this whole building, the aesthetic, just like kind of like that fantasy castle aesthetic. It almost kind of reminded me of Hogwarts or something like that. But yes, Klein meets with Captain Dunn and he quickly signs a contract and he will officially be working for the police, but really they're secretly handling Beyonder incidents, which certainly sounded pretty exciting. I'm like, okay, you get to take down people with powers, whether because they're evil or because they lost control of their powers. Out of all the sequences we saw of the members of Nighthawk, Dunn Smith had the lowest sequence number. I mean, you know, it's the highest power, but it's the lowest number. He had sequence 7. Leonard had sequence 8. Basically, everyone else had sequence 9. At first, when going into the series, I was wondering, like, okay, how fast are we going to come across, like, a sequence 2, a sequence 3, and stuff like that? But it's like, okay, they're leaving a lot of room for that potential. So that's kind of fascinating. Like, they don't immediately introduce you to, like, I don't know, a sequence 1, for example, because even a sequence 7 like Dunn Smith seems insanely strong. So it makes me wonder, like, how strong will some of the top sequences be? Now, of course, they said you will have basically godlike abilities at that point. And even Klein receives an ominous warning, like, hey, joining us, yeah, it might be cool, but you do risk losing control, which confuses him at first, but then Captain Dunn, essentially, he brings him to this graveyard, filled with graves, by the way. There are a lot of graves here. And he tells him these are the graves of all the Nighthawk members that we've lost over the years. Most of the deaths were because of Beyonders losing control. So I like the fact that even from the start, he's like, yeah, you will gain abilities and things like that, but there's the other side of, like, you risk losing control. You risk, you know, death. Like, it's not all glamorous. But anyway, Klein is told the Evernight goddess has sequence 9 potions for 4 starting pathways, and he's got to make a choice between the 4. Which, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not someone who's great at making especially life-altering choices. Like, This is a big deal. You don't want to choose wrong, and then you also don't want to live with the regret of like, man, I should have chosen this one or this one. But yes, he's told they have the complete sequence for the sleepless pathway. They also have the corpse collector, which is great for self-defense. They also have mystery prior and then the seer. And those ones have mysticism advantages, but they also lack the ability to counter. Now, it was interesting when Dunsmith tells him like, hey, yeah, the seer pathway, like we only have sequence 9 for that one. So it almost sounds like the least intriguing of them, but because it sounds the least intriguing, it was the most intriguing, if that makes sense, because it's like, okay, this one is the one that they know the least about. That's probably the one he's going to choose, the seer pathway. But anyway, Klein is told like, hey, take your time. In the meantime, go and see the old man in the alchemy room. But as Klein leaves, I love this brief moment we get with Dunsmith, where as the leader, he's clearly looking at these graves with a heavy heart, you know, all the sacrifices over the years. And I love this quote he has where he says something along the lines of, they are guardians, but also miserable wretches battling dangers and madness. And I really appreciate how right from the start, Dunsmith as the leader, he stresses to Klein like, hey, you're going to get powers, but you gotta be extra careful. Like he shows him the grim side of this world, the dangers of what can happen to you. But what I like the most about what he stresses here is that the most dangerous part doesn't necessarily come from external forces, but comes from within. And I can imagine that as you deal with large amounts of power, as you get closer and closer to godlike beings, you need to be constantly worried about losing things like your sanity and even your humanity. And I do think that there are multiple ways to lose yourself to this madness. One is not being able to control the power and it consuming you. But the other way is more fascinating and potentially worse. Because what if you can control the power? What if you get so ultra powerful, but you lose things that make you human, like empathy and all these things? You become more godlike, but you also devolve into something unrecognizable. So anyway, that's definitely something I want to think on more, and it even got me to wondering, like with Klein in particular, I do wonder just how much his personality might change the stronger he gets, because right now he does seem to be a pretty nice person, a little naive, but for the most part he does feel very friendly. But I have to imagine as he attains more and more power, it will probably also alter his personality and the way he treats people. So again, I am curious to see where exactly that goes. I love that that's a big theme of this series, and really, like I was saying, it feels like there's a lot of philosophical elements of this particular series, both with like reality, luck, destiny, you know, madness, power. But anyway, we get to see Klein and he's like, which are the 4 pathways that they have the potions to do I want? And he's like, well, I probably need mysticism to get back home. So he rules out 2 immediately. He rules out sleepless and corpse collector. So he's like, it's either mystery prior or seer. I was kind of assuming he would go with seer, but you could tell he's clearly struggling to make this decision because, well, one, it's a life-altering decision. I fully understand why. Again, I'm someone who overthinks stuff. So again, I try and exercise like every possibility, and that's often for like simple things, let alone life-altering decisions, things that could result in your death. But anyway, he goes to the alchemy room. He quickly meets this old guy who's a little bit funny, but the old man is certainly interested in Klein, particularly his knowledge of history, and he shows him like this notebook, and he's like, yeah, I'm kind of hoping you can help me decipher one of Emperor Rosel's old notebooks, because he's like, yeah, in 150 years, no one has been able to figure out like, what do these mysterious symbols mean? And the moment he started to say that, I was like, oh, I bet you, especially because, you know, Klein was kind of speculating he probably transmigrated to this world like he did, and he possibly was even from China. I was like, I bet you it's gonna be in Chinese, isn't it? And sure enough, Klein's looking at the symbols and his eyes light up like a Christmas tree. What are the odds? It's Chinese. It's simplified Chinese. And again, these notes have a lot of valuable information about like even properly digesting the potions for the pathways. But the most interesting thing about these notes, especially in that moment, is when Roselle is saying like, yeah, he should have chosen the apprentice, the seer, or the bandit pathways. So it was pretty clear from that point on, like Klein is definitely going to choose the seer pathway because he doesn't have access to those other 2 pathways. And he already narrowed down his choices between the mystery prior and the seer. So it's going to be the seer. But I will say, I kind of wish that the old man didn't stop him or let him have access to the rest of the stuff. I get it though, like the old man is like, there's not a chance he could decipher any of this. He even kind of scoffs at Klein a little bit because he's like, young people always think that they're like the most special one and like they'll be the one to do something, which is kind of true. But in this case, like, Klein is just like the one person in the entire world, most likely, who can actually decipher that. So again, I'm like, you gotta get access to the rest of those notes. And other notes that Roselle definitely left behind. But yeah, Klein decides on the Seer pathway, and it's interesting the way the old man looks at him, like he was kind of surprised, like, I didn't think you would choose that one. Okay, interesting. Like, you sure about this? Because you can't go back. Like, are you absolutely sure? But Klein's like, yeah, so he makes the potion and he drinks it. And some chaos erupts, but he's like, hey, settle your mind. First, picture something from, you know, your day-to-day life. And it's like, okay, easy enough. And then when he says, like, imagine something not of this world, I'm like, oh my goodness. Because that would be so incredibly hard to do. Like, if somebody told you, imagine something not of this world. Like, what are you even imagining? But of course, Klein is uniquely suited to perfectly imagine stuff not of this world. And a bunch of chaotic stuff is happening. Whatever is happening, I'm pretty sure this is not ordinary. Like, this feels like a very unique response to drinking a potion, simply because of how accurately he could imagine stuff not of this world, because, well, he is not of this world. And even the old man is looking on like, what exactly is he imagining? It's a little bit funny, but he eventually digests the entire potion. The old man is definitely a little surprised. And even when it comes to Roselle's notes, and he was talking about the potions, and he was basically saying like the names aren't simply symbolic, but one of the biggest keys when it truly comes to internalizing the power, to properly consume the power. And if I'm kind of understanding that, which I could be misreading that, but even when it comes to the Seer pathway, the fact that Klein could make such a concrete image of things not of this world and to truly see these things makes me think he truly internalized the potion in a way no one else had really done before. I could be mistaken. Again, with this show, it does feel like you need to think on things a little bit more. I don't mind that. Again, I know I don't fully understand what's going on, and I will definitely get details wrong, but I do appreciate how the series makes you think. But Klein now has the Seer pathway, sequence 9, and I'm like, okay, this is a great start. It'll be nice to see how high he'll get. But Klein now has spirit vision, and he can see people's auras and things like that. Now he also sees some freaky eyes, and he even sees what looks to be like, I guess, another spirit's outline. So I guess people were like watching on or something like that. I don't know. The old guy seems a little cagey about it, like, don't worry about it. But he's like, hey, that's your spirit vision. Like, don't overuse it. You can turn it off and on by tapping between the eyes twice. And there's a funny moment where he's like, yeah, Leonard, when he was getting used to his spirit vision, accidentally fell down a bunch of stairs. So like, don't be like Leonard. I do like when they inject more of these funny moments in a pretty serious show for the most part. Like, you're dealing with all sorts of wild mysteries, death, and things like that. So a little bit sprinkled in here and there is nice. But anyway, Klein, he gets a bunch of ammo for his job. He also gets his starting salary, which he's obviously ecstatic about because he's like, okay, now I can get out of poverty. And seeing his place, it's like, okay, yeah, I'd be excited too. But Klein goes out and gets a fancy cane, and this is when he goes on his first mission with Leonard. Now they're supposed to find the son of a tobacco merchant who was kidnapped, and at first they think like this is just a normal mission for the most part, like it doesn't have to do with Beyonder incidents, but you kind of know, like, you know, something's going to go wrong, or this is going to be a little bit more complex than they're thinking. But even so, we get to see Klein use his abilities very fast because Leonard's like, you're a seer. Finding people is basically a seer's specialty, so he gives him like one of the missing kid's garments, and then Klein, you know, like he uses his cane, he presses on it, and it's actually kind of cool seeing him use his abilities, but I'm like, this does feel like the kind of thing you got to be careful with, because it seems like it's easy to lose your mind if you especially overdo it, or don't have like a strong mental capacity. But yes, they arrive at the place with the kidnapped kid, and you see the two kidnappers, but something is clearly off with them, like you could tell by their eyes. I mean, they look like drug addicts or something like that, so it's like they probably took like some potions or something that they shouldn't, and it is like a Beyonder incident, but regardless, Leonard's like, okay, I'm gonna handle this, it should be easy. And the thing is, he puts on a show. Like, this man is really strong and in command, and that's the thing, like, he busts down the door, but he's also like so much faster than the other two, and he's pretty strong as well, but he also looks in command at all times doing it. I mean, you could say he's aura farming, but like, I mean, he is. Like, let's be honest with ourselves. Like, this man dodges a bullet, moves around fast, bends the gun, totally destroys one of the guys, winks at the child, starts boxing them, and he is just owning them. And quickly they get knocked down, and it's clear, like, okay, you know, that was easy, but it's like, it's too easy. Like, something is clearly wrong. And then you see, like, this feather falling. I'm not entirely sure, like, what was the significance of that? I did wonder if that implied like other people were actually behind this and turning them into Beyonders and making them lose control. But regardless, it causes like some sort of chain reaction. And those two guys have this horrible reaction, and again, I guess this is the bad side of like, you know, a Beyonder losing control. Because they turn into a hideous monster, and I'm like, all this for a first mission? But Leonard is definitely still in command of the situation. He's dodging like crazy. It's pretty cool to watch. But this is where the monster is like, okay, I've got to make a getaway. So Leonard's like, okay, this is a perfect opportunity for Klein to, you know, use his abilities, learn under fire, which... Again, this is a lot for a first mission. Now he's got to locate a monster that he can't see, while also preparing, you know, to shoot it when the time comes where it jumps out at them. I would not do well in a situation like that. Like, I struggle even watching like horror movies, horror games. I would need to be paid significantly more. Like, whatever you're paying him, it needs to be more. But he does use his abilities, and this monster jumps out and he shoots it, so it's like, okay, he does pretty well. Then it's like the monster tries to escape. And this is where Leonard uses some of his poet abilities, because he's got like the Midnight Poet pathway, and he's also sequence 8. So yeah, no, he's definitely in command of the situation. He is really strong, but he also looks cool doing it. So I guess you could say that's the most important thing. Like, if you don't look cool, then are you even really that strong? No, okay. But seriously though, he knocks it out pretty fast, and he's like, okay, people will be here to take care of the rest. But he also stresses to Klein, he's like, hey, this is out of the ordinary. Like, most people don't run into an out-of-control Beyonder on their first mission. And once again, he tells him, like, you're lucky. Which seems to be a thing he's constantly stressing, especially with Klein. Now, Klein does get some, like, flashes, maybe because of, like, his memory or something kicking in, where he realizes, like, the previous Klein was here before, and it's like, okay, what exactly is going on here? Obviously, it has to do with whatever he was up to before his death, particularly with that ancient notebook. But there's an interesting moment between Klein and Leonard, where Leonard at first kind of freaks out Klein a little bit, because he's like, you got an interesting aura that attracts me. And even Klein is like, this guy's a weirdo. But what was kind of fascinating is Leonard was looking at Klein kind of interestingly, and there was like a shadow which moved, which Leonard was basically like, I guess he's not special like I thought he was. But it's also pretty clear that Klein is very special. So anyway, I don't really know what that scene was about. Perhaps I need to think on that more or watch it again, but it was just kind of fascinating. But anyway, just when I thought like the episode was coming to an end, this is where we get yet another trippy scene, because again, Klein arrives back at his place. He's going into his room, and then all of a sudden he gets teleported back to where he was earlier, that mysterious building where he was like, Klein was here before. And through a hallway, he realizes like, okay, this obviously has some sort of clue to do with a notebook. And then he wakes up and it's like, okay, like this whole, am I dreaming, am I not, waking up, questioning reality constantly would drive me insane. But it also makes the show fascinating. But yeah, 2 wildly fascinating episodes. They definitely threw a lot at me. I just kind of wanted to share some of my thoughts on this. I don't know, like, let me know if you want me to do more of these videos where I kind of like in depth try and talk about it, like some of my thoughts. It was definitely fascinating, but aside from all the intrigue and things like that, I've talked about like the sound design is just so good. And obviously the animation, but everyone talks about the animation. I feel like the sound design maybe went a little underrated, or maybe people weren't highlighting it as much as they should be, but it's also top tier. Anyway though, what do you think about this? And if you like this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It really does help, and thank you for watching.